What is red cows? If you're a Vietnamese social media user who's been online long enough, you've probably noticed a group that consistently leads trends across platforms. They're often described as aggressive, numerous, and fiercely patriotic. Netizens have given them the nickname red cows. In this video, let's explore the classification and true purpose of red cows. Definition. Red cows refers to an ultranationalist force active on Vietnamese social media, primarily on three platforms: Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. The term is made up of two parts, red and cows. Cows implies regurgitating. In this context, cows is used to imply the regurgitating or repetitive nature of this animal. Red cows specializes in spamming recycled arguments and chaotic logic year after year, without any upgrade or innovation. Red refers to their political stance, fervent support for Marxism-Leninism and socialist states, paired with a deeply negative attitude toward capitalism and Western countries. Classification. Red cows is divided into two main types, each with distinct traits. The first is commonly known as lower-rank cows. This group has three major characteristics. 1. Personal attacks as default rhetoric. This is the core behavior of red cows. Even without knowing who their opponent is, they'll readily accuse others of being self-hating traitors or reactionaries. In ideological terms, they throw around labels like capitalist, fake Democrat, pro-West, and more extreme slurs like Three Homelander, yellow-veined, bootlicker, thirsty, and other crude phrases. Even if you live in Vietnam, they'll say you're an American from California. Even if you drink 2 liters of water a day, you'll still be called thirsty. No matter your job, you'll be branded a servant or lackey. 2. Us versus them thinking. Also known as binary or polarized thinking, this mindset divides everything into two camps. Us, always right. Them, always wrong. This pairs with personal attacks to form the classic red cows combo. It's simple. Slap a crude label on someone, and they're instantly cast as the villain. Since there are only two sides, red cows automatically becomes the hero. At that point, any reasoning you offer becomes meaningless. They'll refuse to listen and instead focus entirely on mocking and attacking you. 3. Flood tactics. Although the quality of their arguments is low, red cows relies on quantity to overwhelm. They create fear and pressure through sheer numbers and performative patriotism. One person might post a comment filled with personal attacks or extreme views, and then others will pile on in agreement, creating an echo chamber of intimidation. Once a comment is posted, it quickly racks up massive reactions in a short time. But when you look into the profile of the commenter and those who agree with them, you'll often find their clone accounts, the second type of red cows, known as cow chief or high-level cows. Because red cows, aside from their talent for labeling and attacking others, have almost zero actual argumentative skill. And you can't persuade people just by insulting them, you need a higher level of rhetorical ability. That's when the cow chief step in. These are content creators who run Facebook pages, groups, or YouTube and TikTok channels aligned with that ideology. Thanks to this orientation, they attract large followings of red cows and form what are known as cow hubs. The content in these hubs mostly revolves around two themes. 1. Looking to the past. Cow chief produce content about the heroic sacrifices of Vietnamese soldiers and civilians during wartime, or about the crimes committed by colonial powers against the Vietnamese people. The content itself is old and recycled, nothing new. But what matters is the emotional tone. The writing is drenched in sentiment, tragic and dramatic, the kind that stirs patriotic fervor in many red cows. Once that emotional nationalism is activated, the actual content no longer matters. Exaggeration is fine. Downplaying or twisting facts is fine. Rewriting history in any direction is fine. 2. Red orientation. Cow chief love to passionately support authoritarian regimes and communist or former communist countries. They actively mock democratic systems and Western nations, especially the United States. Whenever there's unrest in the US, cow chief in Vietnam are quick to update the news and add captions mocking democracy in general. But why choose the US, a country that legally protects protests, as the sole representative of Western democracy? When Trump became the 45th President of the United States, red cows started predicting that overseas Vietnamese would be kicked out due to his anti-immigration policies. Can anyone explain why cow chief are so obsessed with American life, especially in California? Global conflicts. In international disputes, both cow chief and red cows consistently oppose pro-US countries like Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and South Korea. Their content claims these nations are US puppets, lacking independence, and constantly facing political instability and war. In contrast, they enthusiastically support provinces, regions, or countries like Russia, Palestine, China, and North Korea in their resistance against the distant Western powers. Political orientation of red cows. Their stance becomes clear through their repeated choices of sides. Red cows deeply resent democratic values promoted by the West, viewing them as a form of neocolonialism, pushed by capitalist countries to destabilize and overthrow governments in places like Vietnam. On the other hand, they support authoritarian regimes, socialist states, or ultra-communist countries, purely for ideological reasons. At the same time, it's also because the ruling powers in these countries constantly reinforce and maintain their existing authority. This supposedly creates peace, stability, and preserves Vietnam's current political status quo. We firmly believe that Russian watches are better than Swiss watches, as if that's a matter of ideological pride. It's the same kind of imagined belief that China is more virtuous than the US, with a beauty and innocence that's almost naive. In general, cow chief differ from red cows mainly in method. Cow chief don't crudely slap labels like red cows do. Instead, they selectively pick favorable events and interpret them through an ideological lens. Socialist camp equals always right. Capitalist camp equals always wrong. This is us versus them thinking, but at a more sophisticated, ideologically tinted level. An interesting twist. Much of the content from Chief Cow is actually sourced from Western social critics. But when others cite Western scholars to counter those views, red cows immediately label it as capitalist nonsense, and dismiss it as invalid. Pink calves. Originally, I only planned to discuss two categories. But after scrolling TikTok, I was shocked to discover a third, extremely dangerous type, pink calves. These are young kids who've been exposed to dictatorial thinking through apps from an early age. If exposed long enough, they inevitably become pink calves, the reserve force for red cows. This is how ultranationalist ideology continues across generations. What I'm really trying to highlight here is what's happening on the school bus, in the educational environment. I'm not calling students pink calves, but when children are taught dictatorial thinking by their teachers at such a young age, it's only a matter of time before they become both pink and militant. We don't need to wait for these students to grow up to see the results. The answer is already visible in a recent trend, teenagers posting photos of themselves doing provocative acts in front of the three-striped flag at the Military History Museum. This is living proof of overexposure to dictatorial thinking, and the strange behaviors of red cows. If we only talk about red cows' rhetorical tactics, we're just discussing the tip of the iceberg. To truly understand their mindset, we need to analyze their bizarre behaviors, only then can we uncover the real intentions behind each strange act. This section will be presented as a series of questions. I'll pose the questions, and you'll reflect and find your own answers. They might be right or wrong, but they'll help you see the submerged part of the iceberg. Strangeness number 1, rhetorical skill. If red cows' only rhetorical skill is personal attacks, how can they persuade anyone? Clearly, no one wants to follow someone who only knows how to label and insult. Yet after all these years, red cows still chew on the same tired arguments, never improving their rhetorical level. So here's the question. What is the true purpose of red cows? To persuade others or get them to think like you need more than just repetition. Does your thinking change after following a certain type of content for a long time? Strange phenomenon number 2, the cows flooding tactic. You may notice that when red cows go into a frenzy, it's highly organized. Chief Cow will simultaneously post articles with identical content, even entertainment pages suddenly start posting political news. Then red cows swarm in to react and comment, causing engagement to spike. Examples include the 9-line controversy in the Barbie movie. The coordinated backlash against Fulbright University over flower-themed keywords on social media. This raises questions. How effective is this flooding tactic in shaping public opinion? What criteria does Facebook's algorithm use to surface such content? Is red cows spontaneous or organized? Why are there so many clone accounts, and how do they coordinate so seamlessly? Why do pages from completely different fields post about the same topic at the same time? Does this frenzy always happen at specific moments? Strange phenomenon number 3, yellow cows. As mentioned in the previous video on nationalism, one strategy is to invent a permanent enemy to fuel nationalist sentiment. For red cows, the biggest enemy is the former Republic of Vietnam, which they mockingly call yellow cows. Personally, I'm skeptical of this. The highest-ranking generation of the Republic fled to the US long ago, they're either elderly or have passed away. The younger generation is more focused on their lives in America. I haven't seen any organization with the intent or credibility to revive the old regime or legitimately use the three-striped flag. Even the individuals, groups, or pages considered hostile forces often behave in strangely humorous ways. Sometimes, the very online newspapers that red cows despise publish articles that are blatantly anti-communist, lacking any coherent argument, completely different from their usual editorial style. This gives red cows a chance to show off their rhetorical skills, claiming superiority over these hostile forces. At times, overseas opposition groups behave so clownishly that it feels like they're deliberately creating content for red cows to mock. And so, the red cows crowd gets to chime in. These guys will never restore their country. Especially every April, this phenomenon intensifies. What's so special about April? Have you ever heard of controlled opposition? It refers to a group that appears to oppose a regime, but is actually created by that very regime. The goal is to provide a clear target for nationalist attacks, while also distorting public perception of the opposition. Question: could this be a case of controlled opposition, meaning the red cows themselves step out to play the role of hostile forces? Another term for this situation is red cows with yellow fur. How much of what we call hostile forces are actually hostile? Strange phenomenon number 4, selective patriotism. Red cows can go into a frenzy over all sorts of issues, that's normal. But strangely, when it comes to more important matters that directly affect us, they go completely silent. Example 1. They went wild over the Barbie movie showing the 9-line, even though we all know it wasn't clearly depicted. But when Vietnamese fishermen's boats were involved in an incident in the South China Sea, they were eerily silent. Example 2. They posted endlessly about a celebrity scandal involving a model allegedly linked to My 3. Yet at the same time, a major incident happened in Chile, and there was no coverage at all. Meanwhile, US and international media were reporting heavily on it. So here's the question. In example 1, which country produced Barbie? And in the fishing boat incident, which country was responsible? What was Red Cow's strongest reaction to South China Sea issues? Follow-up question. Why do red cows show such passionate patriotism toward a regime that's long dead and poses no threat to Vietnam's sovereignty? But when it comes to a real political entity that still exists and could actually violate Vietnam's sovereignty, their patriotism seems lukewarm. Question for example 2. Is celebrity gossip about My 3 really that common? Why did red cows push the scandal so aggressively at that moment? Follow-up. How credible was the Chile incident? I'll answer this one directly. You need to be cautious with international media. Hostile forces are deliberately muddying the waters, exploiting situations to spread misinformation and incite unrest. Only when it's reported on Vietnamese TV can the news be considered authentic, okay? Consequences of Red Cow's behavior. Consequence number 1, becoming a passive consumer of ideology. Constant exposure to us versus them thinking makes us obsessively divide everything into good versus bad, always digging up flaws to attack others. I agree, the West has committed many wrongs in history, and our side has achieved admirable things. But the way Red Cows frame it is overly polarized and lacks nuance. In reality, politics is never that black and white. It's always a gray zone, folks. Once you understand this, you'll see why Red Cows want to impose binary thinking on others. Because once you start thinking in gray zones, your mind becomes more open, and openness turns absolutes into relatives. And that means consequence number 2, harm to the democratic environment. The extreme behavior of Red Cows damages the democratic environment that our party and state have been building. From the founding of the nation, the party and state have always respected democratic values, clearly reflected in Vietnam's legal system. From the Constitution to various laws, citizens are granted the right to express social criticism. However, the rigid us versus them mindset is clearly incompatible with constructive civic discourse. It fractures the close relationship between the party and the people, making it impossible for citizens to exercise their rights to critique and contribute. Consequence number 3, loss of credibility for the party and state. Red Cows claim to defend the party and state, but they do so with extreme tactics, labeling, slandering, and attacking anyone indiscriminately. This doesn't protect anything. In fact, it seriously undermines the credibility of the party and state. Ideally, Red Cows should elevate their rhetorical skills to the level of Chief Cow if they truly want to defend anything. Why that's necessary, you can refer back to the earlier points. Consequence number 4, Red Cows may backfire on us. History shows that ultranationalist forces are often used as political tools to maintain legitimacy, but these same forces can turn around and scrutinize leadership, questioning whether it remains faithful to its original path. A clear example is China's Red Guards, initially a political tool of Mao. But later, they spiraled out of control, attacking even high-ranking party members, especially reformists like Deng Xiaoping. Eventually, Mao had to shift toward economic reform to dismantle this force.